90s. And now the chairmanship of the institute have been turned over to Dr. Dino Patijalal, who is also the chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. So FPCI and PSAT are two different institutions, but we are like a brother and sister. We are working together side by side. Now, I want to talk this afternoon about the Philippines. In the past series, we have been talking about the Singapore, Malaysia, and now we're talking about the Philippines. Why? Not only because of the Philippines as the chair this year of ASEAN, but also the strategic significance of the Philippines in Southeast Asia, not only now, but has been but for a long time. So I'm speaking with Professor Renato. Professor Renato, let me read out his extensive CV, but a short one. Very long, but I'll try to concise into three sentences that will appeal to everybody. So allow me to introduce Professor Renato. His name is Renato Cruz de Castro. Is one of the Philippines' most prolific and influential political scientists, holding the Dr. Aurelio Calderon Chair in Philippines-American Relations at the De La Salle University. With over 100 publications across major journals worldwide, he is consistently ranked the country's top political scientist in both output and citations. His scholarship has shaped national security thinking, earning him the AFP Sandigan Stakeholders Award for advancing understanding of regional security and the Philippine sovereignty. I think we are just a little bit had a technical problem. We just had lost Professor Renato by connection, so we are waiting him to rejoin again. But for those who are joining here this afternoon, we thank you for your participation. And this conversation will only goes for around 1 hour. So I'm only borrowing your 1 hour time today. I hope you can pick up um, some snacks, coffee, right? And we will discuss and talk about the Philippines. Should you have any questions, please just simply prepared, and you can simply post it in this channel. And I will happily to read out, or I will call your name to simply ask Professor Renato. Let me give you a little bit background about what we are doing here. So the Southeast Asia Center for Southeast Asia Studies, we are focusing on studying not only ASEAN as an organization, but we are also studying every single Southeast Asian countries. And what is the significance? The significance is ASEAN is driven by a security community, meaning that we have managed to build trust in the highest degree in the past 5 decades. But however, understanding among each other is still very limited, and sometimes very exclusive to the elites. So this is an effort to make the understanding about others of Southeast Asian countries more inclusive. Now, Professor Renato just joined us again. Can you hear me now, Professor? Right. Can you hear me? Hi, Professor. Can you hear me? Hello, Professor Renato. Can you hear me? Professor, can you hear me? Okay, while we are waiting for Professor Renato, let me also continue to give you another background on how this discussion will be approached. So this discussion will be approached based on the conceptions of strategic culture. So what is strategic culture? So strategic cultures is a terminology that developed by international relation academic and community and also practitioners. It's begins from the conceptions of political culture, but it's add up another elements and to become the term strategic cultures. So strategic cultures has basically 6 elements of it. The first element is foundational belief of or the worldview of the country. And then the second one is historical experiences of that country. And then the third one, political and institutional structures, how the government form and how the political dynamic form the the behavior of the country. I have received the message that Professor Renato just joined. Professor Renato, can you hear me? Okay, we're still waiting for him. So the fourth conception is geopolitical environment, how the geopolitical environment shape the country's behavior and the country's tradition strategically, military diplomacy, economic diplomacy, and its interactions with the region. The fifth is the strategic behavior and practice, as I mentioned before, how this become a patterns in the country's history, and that projects the projection of the countries in the future. Now, Professor Renato, can you hear me?
Uh, the connection is very unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes, I
Can
can.
you hear me?
Yes,
It's
I
unstable.
suggest you. Yes, I suggest you to turn off your camera.
Hello?
So yeah, I suggest you to turn off your camera so we can hear you.
It's very unstable, unfortunately.
Can you turn off your camera, sir?
I can't hear you.
Yeah. Can you turn off your camera? Maybe the committee in Jakarta, can you help to message Professor Renato to turn off
Tayo.
the camera so we can hear, so he will have more stable connection? All right. I think
Okay,
you, no, right. You have more better. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Probably I
Yeah.
was in a dead zone.
Great,
Okay.
perfect. Okay, great. So I've been talking for minutes before, Professor Renato, not only explaining about yourself, but also to tell the backgrounds of this approach of this discussion. I told everybody that we're approaching this discussion on the strategy culture of the Philippines. So I will not spending more time to talk. I would like to offer the microphone to you. i so, Professor, please treat us like your student in the classroom where we do not know nothing about the Philippine strategic cultures. We want to understand about the Philippines, and this is part of the efforts to educate the rest of the Southeast Asian about the Philippines. As we know, this is part of the effort to increase understanding among Southeast Asian countries. So I would like to help ask your help and how we can better understand the Philippines, not only in the past, the present, and also the future. I offer the microphone to you, Professor.
First of all, let me express my pleasure and utmost gratitude for being a chance to deliver a talk in honor of Ambassador Jalal. I personally know him. I had the chance to meet him in a conference on the South China Sea in Ho Chi Minh City. This was in September 2009, just before the South China Sea issue became a very important issue. I had a chance. I've met him several times. And of course, Dino Jalal is a good friend of mine, Ambassador Dino Jalal. The father and son are my very good friends. So, again, let me start by discussing Philippine strategic culture by starting with, of course, a policy that our government announced in January 2024. This is called the Comprehensive Archipelagic Defense Concept. This is, of course, the first time that the Philippines has come out with a grand strategy. A grand strategy, of course, means that you're preparing for a possible armed conflict. That's the very notion of grand strategy. You must understand that in almost probably 70 decades, no different from Indonesia, we have focused our concern with internal security issues. This is the first time that we have basically looked at outside and, of course, look at the prospect of a possible armed conflict. And I guess the elephant in the room is the fact that we are confronted among the Southeast Asian countries. We are confronted with an expansive power that has, of course, been occupying, entering our maritime domain. in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea, and more so threatening us in the Luzon Strait. And I guess everyone knows I'm talking about the dragon, the big dragon in our neighborhood. It's China. So this is a preparation. So in a way, CADC has two components. Number one is to build up the armed forces of the Philippines for asymmetric conflict. We know for a fact we could not develop enough military capability to engage our big, expansive, and rich neighbor head on. And the other component, of course, is strengthening our alliance and security partnerships. So a lot of people are saying that this is a break. This is a break from the Philippine strategic culture or strategic concern because we have focused primarily on internal security, focusing on asymmetric defense, and of course the fact that even when focused on internal security, we have also relied on the United States, especially of course during the time of the war on terror, and even of course when we're fighting the internal communist insurgency. So people are saying this could be a mark in a break in Philippine defense policy. But my argument of my two papers which I shared with you is no, it is in a way a continuation of Philippine defense policy. In a way, it's a reflection of Philippine strategic culture. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you, Prof. You can continue.
Okay. So what are the three
Prof, I think we lost you about your voice. We cannot hear your voice. Professor, we cannot hear your voice.
continental Southeast Asia, which creates a notion among our political elite that we are protected by our maritime domain that acts as a sort of a buffer or a barrier against any power from mainland Asia, East Asia. So this created the notion among our elite that defense, spending money on defense is not necessary. Plus, of course, also the history of our political elite. We haven't, unlike Indonesia or, of course, Vietnam, we haven't had a revolution. The political elite we had during the Spanish period has basically also been the continuation of the political elite. They are basically what you call the ilustrados, the Spanish mestizos, land owning, who, of course, had never experienced any major challenge, except, of course, in terms of internal insurgency. So that's one element. The reluctance of the political elite to spend money for defense. So probably next to Indonesia, primarily because of pure population, we have the lowest per capita expenditure when it comes to defense. Of course, the highest is Singapore, Malaysia, so forth. Where Indonesia and the Philippines are the lowest, primarily because of our focus, internal security, and of course the assumption that we're protected by the sea against any threat from continental Asia. Second element, of course, is a focus on asymmetric conflict. This is, of course, a result of the fact that, of course, this is where we have a sort of divergence in history. The Philippines, unlike Indonesia, you have, of course, a civilization. You go to Java, we never had. Of course, looking back history, we can argue that the Philippines and Indonesia were part. Probably before the coming of the Western powers, the Philippines was, of course, in the periphery, whereas, of course, Java, that southern part of Indonesia, constitute what we call probably a greater Austronesian kingdom then. But of course, we were separated by destiny because of colonial powers. The Spaniards basically occupied us. But although we were under Spanish colonial rule for almost 300 years, there was, of course, continued resistance. The resistance we applied against the Spaniards is basically a reflection of the Austronesian, the fact that we are very good when it comes to asymmetric warfare, raiding, use of raid, maritime. You just go to this, the Sulu Islands. You go to Mindanao. You see, of course, the fact that you do not engage the enemy head-on. It's usually a case of asymmetric conflict. You do not engage. But of course, again, this is another difference between the Philippines and Indonesia. Your TNI, your military, was, of course, a creation of revolution. You have a break. Not in the case of the Philippines. Historically, the armed force of the Philippines has been is linked with the establishment of the colonial army during the Spanish period, then of course during the American period. The armed forces of the Philippines has its origin, of course, to the Commonwealth Army that was created during the time when the Philippines was, of course, a colony of the United States, a Commonwealth. So there's been a continuity. So what's the implication of this? Our colonial relation with, of course, the Spain and later on the United States make us easier to take into account the importance of alliance. We are not, we don't have any obsession or hang up for independence. Rather, it's a recognition that if we have to fight a conflict, we have to rely on the United States. Of course, before 1992, you have American bases here. Of course, it's a very divisive political issue. But of course, eventually the Americans left in 1992, but that alliance relation continued with the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951, and later, of course, we have the Visiting Forces Agreement, then, of course, Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. So what are the three key elements of Philippine strategic culture? Number one, of course, is the reluctance of the political elite to spend money on resources. The fact that the armed forces of the Philippines, ever since, of course, we became independent in 1946, has focused primarily, of course, on internal security, fighting, of course, communist insurgency, which unlike, you got rid of your communist insurgency in the 1960s. We still have, a lingering communist insurgency, but of course, fighting the Muslim secessionist movement. Then, of course, the terrorist Abu Sayyaf movement is a continuous. But so, I think there won't be any argument that compared to all militaries in probably the whole East Asia, it's the armed forces of the Philippines that, of course, combat experience. Of course, focus primarily on internal conflict. Of course, the last major internal conflict that the armed forces fought, head on was the Marawi uprising in 2017, which gave the armed forces of the Philippines at least an experience, combat experience, when it comes to large-scale urban conflict. So then the element, of course, the other element, of course, is our reliance with the United States. So how are these three elements of Philippine strategic culture reflected in current Philippine grand strategy? And I go back to the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. Number one, of course, although there is already a plan, there's still reluctance, on the part of the political elite to fund it. Defense budget is still below 2%. There's still reluctance on the part of the political elite to spend money, rather spend money on, flood control infrastructure project, which is currently, of course, a major controversy here. This, of course, gives really especially from the point of view of the armed forces of the Philippines, the political elite rather spend money on infrastructure projects, which are, of course, sources of corruption, rather than allocated to the defense of the armed forces of the Philippines. Then, of course, CADC provides for asymmetric conflict. So its reliance on the development of anti-access area denial capabilities, acquisition of land-based missile system, development of the Navy and the Air Force, limited as it be, but definitely they're preparing for asymmetric conflict. Plus, of course, if everything else fails, given the fact that armed forces of the Philippines could not develop that military capability to fight head-on with our threat in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea, and of course Taiwan, and the elite are still very much reluctant in funding the modernization program or the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. We rely on our alliance with the United States that, of course, had been buttressed right now with security partnerships. Like, for example, we have a security partnership with Japan, Australia, India, and other countries that, of course, had indicated their interest in supporting the Philippines. And, of course, in confronting our big neighbor, that's China. So, in a way, that's how I perceive Philippine strategic culture. I don't know whether that would change in the near future. Probably we will experience a dramatic economic growth, and hopefully, hopefully this will not happen. If you will have a major conflict, that will, of course, also transform, our Philippine strategic culture once again we experience a major conflict. So I would end my presentation here. I have provided you my PowerPoint presentation and my two articles that I've written on Philippine strategic culture. The first one is in 2014 during the time of the Aquino administration, and the most recent one that just came out last year, which of course incorporated the comprehensive archaeologic defense concept of its course as an epitome, as an articulation of Philippine strategic culture. I end my presentation here. I look forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to ask the committee in Jakarta to put the PowerPoints and also the articles, the papers of Professor Renato in the chat box so everybody can download it and can read through also. Should you have also questions, please do not hesitate to put it in the chat box as well. So, Professor Renato, thank you for giving us a very comprehensive and very overarching conceptions about the Philippine strategic culture. I put note several points, but my question is, as we all know that we are transitioning into a world that yet to be described. My foreign minister yesterday telling that we are entering a world that described by Professor Amitav Archaya, a multiplex order, multiplex situations. And the international law now, we are under threat. As you know, the Philippines and Indonesia, we are both very reliant also on the international law. As we are a archipelagic country, UNCLOS is very vital for our sovereignty also. Um, Now, my question is, you have told us about how the doctrines in the military was focusing inside, and with the new grand strategy, meaning that the Philippines now looking more on the strategic landscape, how we defend ourselves. Um, does this mean, in the perspective of the military, this is the departure of the new paradigm. So it's a departure, it's a shift, not only a shift, it's departure from the old paradigm that focusing internally, but now focusing on the strategic landscape because we have a direct threat to us. That's number one. Is it a departure or is it just adding a new elements on the Philippines defense paradigm? Number two questions is, does the Philippines officially name China as a threat? That's also the question that to us. Singapore Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong said most of Southeast Asia doesn't name China as a threat, but does Philippines officially name China as a threat? So that two questions. Does the Philippines departing from the old defense paradigm? And number two, does the Philippines name China as a threat officially, or it's still in the gray zone in approaching China?
Okay, number one, actually, the efforts to modernize the armed forces of the Philippines has actually been there since 1992 when the Americans left. Because when the American bases were here, there's a sort of a division of labor. The armed forces of the Philippines was comfortable in focusing on internal security, while when it comes to external defense, the American forces that were stationed in Clark and Subic were, of course, structured to defend the Philippines. Of course, when the Americans left, when the last U.S. Marine left Subic Naval Base in November 1992, there was a recognition. So there was effort to really move into that direction, but the problem was there was no notion of a threat. From 1992, there was, of course, reluctance of the Philippine political elite to fund the modernization program until an incident happened in 1995, Mischief Reef incident. That's where we saw the footprint of China moving in. It took some time. There was, of course, eventually that notion of a threat disappeared because of China's, during Chinese soft power diplomacy in the early 21st century. Then the notion of the threat emerged again during the Aquino administration, when we filed the case against China, when there was effort, of course, again, to focus on a threat. Then, of course, you have to understand, during the 6-year term of the Duterte administration, there was really concerted effort for appeasing China. But eventually, the Duterte administration, the second last 2 years of the Duterte administration, realized that whether we appease or challenge China, we get the same result: Chinese expansion. So China would always tell us, let's have a negotiation dialogue, but it doesn't stop China from expanding and applying, of course, coercive action. So eventually, the release of the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept is, in a way, an acceptance that Chinese maritime expansion constitute a clear and present danger to Philippine national security. So I guess, in a way, in my two articles that came out, this set us in a way apart from other Southeast Asian countries who, of course, had a vague, ambiguous attitude regarding China. Right now, for us, especially from the defense, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the National Security Council, and if you see the Transparency Initiative, the recent incidents that happened, like, for example, in August 12th, where you have a combined operation of the Chinese Coast Guard and the People's Liberation Army's Navy, and the most recent 6-page report that was released by the Philippine Navy. And of course, the statement of Secretary Gibo Chidoro on December 31, 2025, basically expressing our concern about the massive Chinese military exercise around Taiwan, which again, no other Southeast Asian country condemned Chinese massive military exercise around Taiwan. It's only the Philippines. So I think actions speak louder than words.
That's interesting. Stop that point. But my question is regarding to Trump. We know how unpredictable he is, and he just recently said international law doesn't matter to him. What's matter to him is his morale. And for us, international law is very, very fundamental for our survivability, Philippines and Indonesia, and also the rest of the
Sure.
Southeast Asian countries. So how Manila now reads Trump, and modernization will take decades, as with Indonesia also. So you need to reliance on the alliance. But I'm also very struck with the point that you're strengthening the network with the Australian, with the Indian, and how does that the substance on it compare? How does that the substance of that cooperations grow compared with the United States? Are you diversifying also with the Australian, or how does the Manila read Trump, and how does you're working with the Australian Indian also put into that equation, put that into the strategy of strengthening alliances?
Well, of course, U.S. action in Venezuela seems to indicate that the United States is very much contemptuous with regards to international law. But you have to admit, it's not only the United States, it's China. And we find China simply hypocritical in criticizing the United States in the United Nations Security Council. Look what China's doing in the West Philippine Sea. Look what China is, violating openly the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea and ignoring, of course, the July 12, 2016 Arbitral Tribunal ruling. Great powers, superpowers are not perfect. They're not angels. But again, this is a point from our perspective. It's a matter of settling for the lesser evil. So from our perspective, of course, American violation of international law in Venezuela, well, it's driven primarily by American national interest that is, of course, took into account America's privileged role in the Western Hemisphere, applying it against a country in the Western Hemisphere that challenges its interests. Of course, it's a different picture here. Here we see the United States, of course, enforcing the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, freedom of navigation, and of course, again, at the end of the day, the United States is our treaty ally. You notice among the treaty partners, Japan, Australia, certain degree South Korea, their reaction to American action against Venezuela is muted because, of course, at the end of the day, we have to value our national interests over international law and morality. We don't want to criticize our ally. Again, we rather deal with, this is an old Moroccan saying, we rather deal with a devil that we know than a devil we don't know. Of course, at this point in time, it's a matter of settling for the lesser evil. China's violation of UNCLOS and, of course, The July 12, 2016 arbitral ruling represents, from our point of view, the most blatant violation of international law, and its criticism of the United States in the United Nations Security Council about violating international law is simply an act of hypocrisy. China simply doesn't have the moral high ground to criticize the US for violating international law because it's also violating international law. Regarding with the course with the Trump administration, we have dealt with the Trump administration in 2017. So in a way, the Trump administration actually saved the Philippine-U.S. alliance against former President Rodrigo Duterte. So that was the case then. Again, going back to my earlier statement, it's better to deal with a devil that you know than a devil that you don't know. We have learned how to deal, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican administration. Right now, if you notice, we're not getting that harsh treatment from our treaty ally. Along with Ukraine and, of course, the Philippines, we were exempted from the suspension of military and economic assistance. Secretary Hegseth visited the Philippines and implied to us the importance of the alliance in the light of possible Taiwan contingency. When, of course, uh, just recently, of course, along with the United States decision to sell $11 billion of military, hardware to Taiwan, the United States told that we will get about $3 billion in military assistance. So at the end of the day, if you have to weigh which is more important, your vital national security interest or international law, which is more important?
So how about your relationship with the Australian, the Indian? You just mentioned it before, and how that's put into the equations.
Australia is a security partner. We have a status of forces agreement with Australia. India has been, of course, had sold us the BrahMos missile, as indicated, of course, to also sell us more weapon system. Of course, when the Indians decided to sell the BrahMos missiles to the Philippines, it's not simply a case of the Philippines and India are, of course, liberal democracies. The Indians also impress upon us that it has something to do, of course, with their rivalry against China. So that's the case. You also forgot Japan. We have, of course, a security partnership with Japan, and we just put into motion the reciprocal access agreement. Japanese self-defense forces will, of course, be operating in the Philippines on training basis, not on a permanent basis, but they'll be here every now and then to conduct military exercises with other U.S. treaty allies.
That's an interesting point. We only have 3 questions, and one of it related to ASEAN, which I also want to ask. But before that, Professor
Hello.
Renato, yes. But before jumping to the questions, I have one question from me, the last one. I mean, I'm coming from a country where we don't have our constitution prohibit us for having alliances, so we don't know that. So that's why I have a very genuine questions. Does U.S. Philippines alliances have limits, and what are those if there is limits?
Can you repeat it again, please? I was
Yeah,
not able to catch it.
right. Does the Philippines U.S. treaty alliances has limit, and what are those?
Well, I won't say it's a limit, but it's a caveat. That's part of our constitution. Our constitution prohibits us from allowing military bases on Philippine territory. Again, the 1986 constitution was in a way, a reaction to the presence of American bases here in the Philippines in the 1980s during the Cold War. But there's always a caveat to it. American forces or foreign forces could be allowed to be based in the Philippines if there is a treaty that would be concurred to by the 2/3 of the Philippine Senate. Of course, what happened in 1991 was the Philippine Senate did not concur to the Philippine-American Cooperation Treaty of 1991 that could have extended the the stationing of American forces here beyond 1992. So that's a constitutional limitation. But of course, it has been circumvented by the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which allowed the presence of American forces on a temporary basis. They can use facilities that, of course, are operated by the Armed Forces of the Philippines, but they're not American bases. Then, of course, we have the Status of Forces Agreement that allows Japan, Australia, and the United States to deploy their forces in the Philippines, again, on a temporary basis. But again, I'm going back to that constitutional provision. That constitutional provisions actually provides a caveat. If a basis agreement could be signed and would be concurred to by 2/3 of the Philippine Senate, then we will have, again, allow foreign bases in the Philippines. Again, I have to discuss this. Our reliance on our reliance on security partners and allies is linked with the reluctance of the Philippine political elite to fund defenses. Again, this created a sort of a symbiotic relation between the Philippine political elite, which had never experienced any dramatic revolutionary change, and of course the reliance on allies that would provide you resources if your society and your political elite refuse to fund your military buildup. So unless, of course, you have a dramatic change the mentality of the Philippine political elite, I don't see any dramatic change in our reliance on security partnership and alliances. So
That's a
it's
very
not constitution. It's yeah,
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 that's a very important point that the elites doesn't want to move to that point, so it will not change.
yeah. The current Philippine political elite right now, again, this set us apart from, like, example, Indonesia and Vietnam,
Yeah.
which of course experienced dramatic revolutionary changes, which enable you to have a different sort of political elite. Indonesia, after, of course, your national liberation struggle against the Dutch, and of course, Vietnam after the unification. But I don't see it happening, any dramatic revolutionary changes that will overthrow the Philippine political elite.
Right.
Unless, of course, you have dramatic evolution or change in the attitude of the Philippine political elite. Probably if we become more industrialized, if the
Mm.
economy become, develop dramatically, or again, I just came from Singapore, and we have a very interesting discussion in Singapore, a one-day conference in Singapore about ASEAN. If ASEAN chances would become a stronger, cohesive regional organization, no different, let's say, from the European Union, wherein our political elite would focus in terms of building up the regional political economy, so that we don't have to rely on external powers to buttress our alliance and ensure, of course, that Southeast Asia remains autonomous from great power competition. But of course, this at this point in time, this is simply a pie in the sky.
Yep. So that's a very good point to start another discussion on ASEAN and the Philippines. I read out one question from Christopher P. Gerale. As the Philippine chairs of ASEAN, is it possible to genuinely lead a neutral arbiter? Okay, I have another nuances to that questions. My questions, Prof, related to ASEAN. I'm a little bit confused with the Philippines' strategic culture in approaching ASEAN and also uh, with the great powers, right? Philippines are the founders of ASEAN, and the very beginning of ASEAN formation was to refuse a monopoly of hegemon or major country in our regions. We want to make a system that free out of major country domination, which we call ASEAN centrality. That's why we are always speaking about ASEAN centrality. So in the Philippines foreign policy logic, when the defense talk about strengthening a relationship with the US, but the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also talking the importance of ASEAN centrality. How this come to play, these two elements?
Well, again, I have a different interpretation on how ASEAN plays its game. No, ASEAN is not a neutralist. We don't want the great powers to be out of the region. The ideal ASEAN gambit of ensuring
Oh, I think we just lost Professor Renato in the middle of very interesting conversation. Let's wait. But I took note the question from Christopher, Patrick, and also Ari. I will ask it after this. Um, so just to sum up, so far, I pick up some important points about the Philippines' strategic reliance even with the United States, uh, but also an important note that the elites see a see they don't see they don't have the appetite to ramp up their military budget due to the strategic cultures of reliance with the United States. So let's wait from Professor Renato. So team in Jakarta, please help us to reconnect with Professor Renato. In the meantime, please do not leave the room. We are still waiting for Professor Renato to return. Hello, Professor Renato. Can you hear me? I can see you. I can see you are in the room, Professor Renato. Can you hear me now? All right, Professor Renato, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me, Prof? Hello, Professor. Can you hear me? Hello, Prof.
Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So you can continue your point about the ASEAN, please.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you. Hello, Prof. Professor, I can hear you from here. Can you hear me back? Professor? So while we are waiting, I just want to little bit see to my notes. I took notes that the three elements of Philippine strategic culture is number one, that the reluctant to spend money on defense, the elite. Number two, there's internal security. The Philippines have been focusing on the internal security for decades, and there has been no a major revolution like what the Vietnamese and the Indonesian experience. So therefore, the paradigm just focusing within the country, and they see the maritime boundaries as the buffer and a not and a very strong, not penetrable wall to the Philippine security. But it's changed with the current dynamic and strategic landscape. And then the third element
Hello.
is the reliance with the United States. Professor, can you hear me now? Professor?
Connection is so unstable.
Yes, I can hear you now. You can turn off your camera if you want. All right. I can see you and I can hear you.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you,
Hello.
Professor. I can hear you, Professor.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I think the
Yes, I
internet
can.
connection is so unstable. I hope we'll have more chance to discuss this matter, especially conference I attended in Singapore last Monday.
Yes,
That's
I
a
can hear
very
you,
interesting
Professor.
question.
Mhm.
Okay,
Please
let me
continue. Please.
discuss this. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So this is my take. When we talk about ASEAN's approach, ASEAN has basically two approaches when we deal with great powers. Number one was, of course, the one that was initially advanced by Indonesia and Malaysia in the 1970s, the neutralists. Then the other school, of course, was advanced by Thailand, the Philippines, and of course, Singapore. That ASEAN would survive, would deal with great powers by bringing all the great powers together in Southeast Asia. I use the term in my works about ASEAN, I use the term equibalancing. We bring in the great powers, we do not rely, we allow the great powers to compete in such a way ASEAN benefits from great power competition within Southeast Asia. And of course, in a way, by the time that we formed the ASEAN Regional Forum in 1994, that was the basis of ASEAN centrality. Great powers give ASEAN centrality because they're engaged in a competition. So by enhancing our alliance, our Philippine alliance with the United States, we ensure that the United States would remain here in Southeast Asia. Because of the end of the day, ASEAN centrality has to do with ensuring that great powers balance each other in Southeast Asia. But of course, that is very challenging right now in the light of the US-China strategic competition, where, of course, this competition among great powers is turning into rivalry and hopefully not armed conflict. Because once you have armed conflict and really intense great power rivalries, that's the end of ASEAN centrality.
That's a very important point that you enlightened us that the Philippines, Thailand, and Singapore is in the school of bringing the great powers to the region and let them in and compete. And I pretty much agree with this to this point. Let me also jump to the question is then in the how do you see the championship of Philippines this year will make a difference and how traditionally ASEAN being addressed in the Philippines foreign policy?
Well, at least on our part, that will impress upon many Filipinos the importance of ASEAN. But I think we have a lot of problems. Right now, of course, in that conference I attended in Singapore, my Thai friend was saying Thailand is, looking at the Philippines to play a very active role in managing the dispute between Thailand and Cambodia. Then, of course, the Philippines has its own agenda when it comes to the code of conduct. Then, of course, you have the issue of Myanmar. There are a lot of issues that will be faced. I don't see the Philippines really coming out with any grand achievement because of the number of fires that have been put or managed. ASEAN never extinguished those fires. We just try to manage those fires. So honestly, we just have simply to muddle through. Again, because primarily of the challenges that ASEAN faces right now, issue regarding tariff, issue regarding, of course, intense U.S.-China strategic competition. Possibly, of course, we also have to factor in what might happen to Taiwan by 2027. So there are a lot of issues that we will have to manage.
The code of conduct deadline, aspiration deadline is 2026, was announced during Indonesian Championship in 2023, and it will be on the Philippines lab. And do you optimistics on this? Many says this is aspirational. Even some schools says let the discussion continues for forever, so we can continue talking how to continue directly talking as a group to China. So how do you see the prospect of code of conduct at this year Philippines Championship?
Well, again, this will be put on the table, but whether there'll be any progress remains another matter. Because again, at the end of the day, this is my take. The primary obstacle to the code of conduct is China. China is expanding into the South China Sea. And from the perspective of many Chinese, what's the point of a code of conduct if we control the South China Sea? So that's my take. The main obstacle to the declaration of code of conduct is no less than China, because China refuses to have any binding agreement that will prevent its expansion, its control of the South China Sea.
So does the Philippines losing its hope with the code of conduct, or how the
Well,
Manila
that's my
sees?
take. That's my take of as an academic. The
Yes, of
government,
course.
probably the department administrator, if I have a different take. But I
Yeah,
have to be honest, I'm an academic.
yeah,
What I
yeah, yeah.
see is what
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. So, regarding, let me jump into the another questions that we just received in the chat box. There's a questions from, I think, question from Patrick. We have answered it about the South China Sea. There's a question from Ari Petra Levi, from Indonesia, from Universitas Veteran Jakarta. The question is, based on my understanding, I see that the Philippine geostrategy, particularly in the security domain, is closely related to the relationship with Washington, D.C. However, I see that in recent phase of the modernization effort, there has been increased the role of the South Koreans as one of the key partners in the security domain, particularly the maritime and air domains. Can this be seen as effort by Manila to recalibrate geostrategy in the context of defense, or does it even reflects an effort by Manila to hedge its bets in order to reduce dependence on the United States?
well, it's more really more of a pragmatic consideration. The weapons being sold to us by the South Koreans suits the need of the armed force of the Philippines. Primarily, you have to understand the gap between what the U.S. might be selling, F-16s, which is, of course, beyond the budget of the armed force of the Philippines, given, again, going back to my early point, the refusal of the political elite to fund any major arms buildup program. And also, or also another factor is the fact that South Korea is also a U.S. treaty ally. So many of the components of these, for example, the FA-50s that we acquired from the Korea aeronautic industry, a number of those components of the FA-50s were actually sourced from the United States because the original plan, the FA-50, which I think Indonesia is also planning to buy, was actually based on a trainer plane that was designed by the South Koreans to train their pilots before they would fly the F-16s. So we just bought, of course, the light fighter plane version. But the original FA-50 was actually a trainer plane designed by the South Korean Air Force cadet pilots before they would fly the more advanced F-16s. So actually, it's still part of this component of it's part of what we call the American alliance system. And I don't know if you're aware, China has basically protested to South Korea about its export of weapons. When the South Korean government decided to sell the Philippines the FA-50s in, I think, 2014, I heard it from my South Korean friend. The Chinese foreign ministry objected to the South Korean embassy in Beijing. So, but the South Koreans proceeded with selling that weapon system. Right now, of course, we're sourcing our ships from Hyundai Heavy Industry, but Hyundai Heavy Industry is also being encouraged by the United States to produce and repair American ships. That's why Hyundai Heavy Industry has already a facility in the former U.S. military base in Subic Bay. So my answer to that is still a pragmatic consideration on the part of the Philippines that South Korean weapons are cheaper than the Americans. And number two, in fact, at the end of the day, South Korea is still a treaty ally of the United States. So it's not really a dramatic break. In fact, right now, even the United States Navy is using the services of Hyundai Heavy Industry when it comes especially to ship repairs and shipbuilding.
Thank you for that very straight to the point answer, Prof. Another question on ASEAN from Gianna Catolico. Okay, so good day, Dr. De Castro. My question is about the Philippines' capability to resolve the regional conflict in ASEAN vis-a-vis the Thai-Cambodia classes. How can the Philippines alleviate tension between these two AMS, Professor?
Of course, again, when we talk about ASEAN's role, in resolving conflict. ASEAN does not actually resolve conflict. ASEAN simply manages those conflicts. The best approach the Philippines would do, again, it's like what Malaysia did. You encourage, of course, candid conversation, dialogue between, of course, Cambodia and Thailand. Let's not be very ambitious about resolving these issues because ASEAN has a lot of unresolved territorial disputes. ASEAN's role is simply to manage those disputes with a hope that probably future generation of Southeast Asians would be wise enough to eventually resolve those issues.
I like that answer. That's a very very tough love on ASEAN, right, Professor Renato? Because in Jakarta,
Yeah, that's
everybody
the
talking
reality of
about
ASEAN,
ASEAN
right?
should. Yeah, I mean, if you are in Jakarta, we are very optimistic that ASEAN should, Indonesia should resolve, and ASEAN should resolve. That's a
ASEAN,
very good.
ASEAN is not designed to resolve issues. That was a topic that was taught to me, instilled in me by my late professor, who's a specialist on ASEAN Indonesia, the late
Yeah.
Dr. Donald Weatherby.
Professor,
It was my dissertation.
I have another question. Again, it's a little bit out of topics, but I'm very curious. If we look to the Treaty of Amity of Cooperations, there is a agreed mechanism, right, to resolve issue, but it never been evoked. Even in the South China Sea, I once wrote that the TAC mechanism should be evoked, but we never evoke it. We never take it. We never activate that mechanism. Can you share your 2 cents why like that?
Again, it's part of ASEAN diplomatic culture. ASEAN diplomatic culture is basically averse to legalism and averse to institutionalism. The treaty provides for conflict resolution based on institution and, of course, international law. It goes against the very grain of ASEAN diplomatic culture. That's my point, right?
Mm,
Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia would rather, forward their cases, their territorial disputes to the International Court of Justice, rather than relying on those conflict resolution mechanism provided no less by ASEAN.
mm. Right. That's interesting. Maybe another question is why is it there? If it's averse with our ASEAN diplomatic culture. All right.
I don't know. We have to ask the founding fathers of
Yes,
ASEAN. We go back to the era
that's
of
true. But
President late
yeah.
Ferdinand Marcos.
Prof, I have another questions. I had a good opportunity, and I would say this is a very golden opportunity talking with the uh, Secretary Albert, the first female women Filipino Secretary of Foreign Affairs, in Jakarta at that time, last year. And she told me that, Calvin, can you guess since when I'm handling ASEAN? I said, when, Bu? And she said, since the beginning in 1967. I was the secretary to the foreign ministers and private secretary. I was there in Bangkok in 1967. And she told me one thing that losing from ASEAN today is the intimacy among the leaders, not only the foreign ministers, but also the head of states. Do you agree with Secretary Albert, Professor, that we're missing that
Well, you haven't
intimacy?
changed. That's natural because you have the generational change. Of course, it's totally different. During the time of the original five, President Marcos, President Suharto, Lee Kuan Yew, those were the days. So ASEAN has to adjust. The more challenging aspect, of course, is the enlargement of ASEAN, which my take has, of course, further weakened the organization. As we expand in terms of numbers, this also creates cleavages within ASEAN. Of course, recently we have decided to expand ASEAN by including another, Timor Leste. So I think that my more immediate concern is how expansion affects ASEAN. ASEAN's cohesion.
Okay, I have an answer to that. I'm in the school of professors that believe that the ASEAN so-called expansion is complete. Because if we remember in 1990s when all ALC-10 are complete, we call it a geographically complete, right? But when Timor-Leste separated from Indonesia, Indonesia have another opinion. No, it's not complete. We need to make Timor-Leste in. Now, Timor-Leste in, I would say that it's complete, will never expand. Although my president said last year in Kuala Lumpur that how about Papua New Guinea join? I'm publicly, even FPCI, my chairman, also Professor Dr. Dino Patijalan PSAT also publicly criticized that point that we cannot open the paradox. We cannot open the Pandora box by adding another ASEAN countries, which I agree with you. If we are keep expanding, that's another challenge. And I would also echo what the Foreign Minister of Singapore, Vivian Balakrishna, says. The limit that ASEAN conception has a limit. We are geographically bounded, right? Where he said, how about European Union limit? Does the EU has geographical limits because they keep expanding to the east, right? And I think that's the strategic leisure of ASEAN that we know where we need to stop. Adding to your point, professors. But besides that, my last questions to you, Professor. Um, um, Having to understand this and knowing the world is moving to the directions that, in our point of view, is wrong, the directions that are very dangerous. How does Manila perceive and read the current transition? And how Manila envision the next world order? We do not say new world order because we believe that the components of United Nations needs to be there. How do you see the next world order would be from Manila perspective?
There's two paths. Number one, of course, right now the reality we face is you have great power competition. I started my career as first as a government researcher, then an academic. I witnessed the Cold War, when it ended. So what I'm seeing right now, in a way, is the continuation of great power competition. That international relations again is driven by great power competition. So I don't really find it as wrong. It's a reality we face. There's developments do not happen because you have moral dynamics here. So when you talk about what's right, what's wrong, we add an element of morality. No, international relations happen because you have power dynamics interacting with institution norms, so forth and so on. So this is something that we face. This would probably evolve. We don't know what will be the end result of this great power competition. Hopefully, it will end the same way as the Cold War ended in 1991. One great power would simply throw the towel and said, "That's it." And of course, we'll see another. The more danger aspect, and I tried very challenging, is an outright systemic conflict. And of course, in our region here in East Asia, we have four dangerous flashpoints that could trigger, of course, a major systemic war between what I will call the Eurasian alignment made up of Russia, China, North Korea, then, of course, the maritime bilateral alliance. And, of course, the Philippines is part of this. So we have four flashpoints: South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, Taiwan, Yellow Sea, Senkaku, and of course the Korean Peninsula. So this is, the we're basically at crossroads. The system could evolve peacefully, and hopefully, this great power dynamics would end peacefully with one great power throwing the towel. And of course, the more dangerous part, but challenging, of course, is seeing within our generation another major systemic conflict, no different from, of course, what happened almost 80 years ago. So that's how I see the region.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Renato. We are running out of time. I also do not want to borrow more time. Thank you so much for your very comprehensive discussion. I took note many points, good points. I do not dare to sum up your very excellent points, but my note is not only thanking you, but also thanking all the participant and very active participant. um, we are believing in PSAT at the Professor Hasim Jalal Center for Southeast Asia Studies that the key point of ASEAN and also each countries within is to continue build a security community, meaning that we keep our high trust to one another and also to continue to strengthen the ASEAN centrality, but at the same time also to strengthen a bottom-up approach in Southeast Asia. Bottom-up approach in Southeast Asia meaning is um, there's an element of geocivic diplomacy where a civil society get more connected, not only academic, but also other fields of work in Southeast Asia, and the sense of regionalism among Southeast Asia being built up and years ahead, and it will create more resilience ASEAN in the way ahead. Starting from Indonesian thinking also that in the security of ASEAN country cannot be separated from a regional security and regional resilience. And that's why it's end up. That's my note to close this discussion. We're not stopped with the Philippines. We are continue with other Southeast Asian countries. This is a very important efforts by PSAT or CSCS of Professor Hasim Jalal. We need to dive to understand every ASEAN country's strategic culture or political culture to make us more understand how ASEAN works and how ASEAN behave and how should ASEAN behave in a way forward. Thank you so much, Professor Renato, for your participation, and thank you for being passion with the internet. But your talk is very important for us. Let's give her a big hand for Professor Renato. Prof, if you have any closing word, please.
Well, I hope we could do it in person in Jakarta or in Manila.
Yeah, of course. And we are planning to go to Manila, Prof, this year.
Okay.
During the
Okay,
first
I'll be here.
summit. I'll keep you in touch. We are planning to go to Manila during the first summit. Okay. All right. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And do not forget to visit our website, psat.center or Hasim Jalal Archive. Hasim Jalal Archive is a key product of our institute. It's a culminations of Professor Hasim Jalal work throughout his life. You can download all his not only articles but also his personal memo on many international issues and also related to international law. So please visit Hasim Jalal Archive and also psat.center. Subscribe to the email, subscribe to the membership. It's free, free of charge. We will continue invite you to the futures event related to Southeast Asia. With that, my name is Calvin. I'm the secretary of PSAT. And also now I'm the visiting fellow at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies with the Japan Foundation. Thank you so much. Good day and good evening from Tokyo. Bye-bye.